Okay, third graders. So today in science, we're going to keep talking about inventing. Last week, you guys, we read the book Rosie Revere, Engineer. And we talked about how she was an engineer and because she would solve problems by creating or inventing something. And then we took a look at some balloon car inventions. We kind of talked about you had to kind of watch how those were invented. And some of you even tried to create them by drawing them. Some of you even made them at home. Today, I'm going to read a news story to you. It's called The Inventor's Secret, What Thomas Edison Told Henry Ford. This book, boys and girls, is about two really pretty famous inventors and what they invented and all that. So as we go through it, we'll see what we learn okay? Not so long ago, the world was a little slower and a little simpler and a whole lot quieter. No airplanes roaring overhead, no cars rumbling down roads, no phones ringing in pockets. Then things began to change because of two curious boys, Thomas and Henry, and one secret. Young Thomas got into trouble a lot. It always started with an experiment. He just had to see how things worked. Thomas was curious about chemistry. He mixed up colorful potions in his basement, but explosions shook the house night and day. Thomas was curious about locomotives. He got a job as a newsboy selling papers on a train, but one of his experiments set the baggage car on fire. Most of all, Thomas was curious about electricity, invisible energy that flowed and stopped, sizzled and popped. He tied wires to his cat's tails and rubbed their furs. Sparks flew that day. Henry was born 16 years after Thomas. He got in a heap of trouble too. He was always doing experiments instead of his chores. He just had to see how things worked. Henry was curious about wind-up toys. He took his sister's toys apart but couldn't always get them back together. Henry was curious about rushing rivers. He built a dam and water wheel to catch his energy, but flooded the neighbor's field instead. Most of all, Henry was curious about engines. Machines that chugged and purred, hiccuped and whirred. He built a steam engine from a 10-gallon can, 10 blades, and a pipe, but it exploded and set the school fence on fire. As Thomas grew older, he dreamed of creating his own inventions. Electric gadgets to make life easier. He designed an electric pen so people could rest their weary hands. His sharp pen cut a stencil that made copies. And just one day, people could print a pile of copies that would have taken weeks to write by hand. As Henry grew older, he dreamed of creating his own inventions too. Powerful engines to make life easier. When he was 12, he spied something amazing, an engine-powered buggy. He'd never seen a vehicle that wasn't pulled by a horse. Henry sprinted up to the buggy, his mind filled with questions. What powered the engine? How fast did it go? What could it do? The driver boasted the vehicle ran on coal and steam, and it went about 12 miles an hour. Its engines powered farm equipment and huge saws. The mighty machine got Henry's mind spinning. An engine didn't eat or rest like a horse. It could carry people, mail, and news fast. From then on, Henry thought about one thing, making his own vehicle. A car hardworking families could afford. Then folks could go to town anytime, just not on the weekly Saturday trip. They could visit faraway places they'd only heard about. But Henry couldn't even repair his own broken watch. How would he ever build a car? Then he heard about Thomas's electric pen. What's his secret? Henry wondered. How did he make such a marvelous machine? Later, Thomas created an invention that recorded and played sounds. When Thomas talked about into his new phonograph, Mary had a little lamb, it talked right back. Mary had a little lamb. His phonograph could also play music. Henry was still dreaming about cars. Everywhere he went, his pockets rattled with metal parts. When he was 17, he took a job at a machine shop to learn more about engines and machinery. 2 years later, a farmer hired Henry to operate a new steam engine. Soon, Henry began tinkering on a steam engine of his own. He strapped the homemade engine to an old mowing machine. His contraption sputtered along for 40 feet, then collapsed. Henry's design was a flop. But everyone was buzzing about Thomas's talking phonograph. What's his secret? Henry wondered. Meanwhile, Thomas was working on an electric light so people could read past dark. After changing his design many times, he created an incandescent light bulb that burned all night. Henry was determined to make his vehicle work, so he took a job at a company that made engines. One day, he repaired a fancy engine from England. It had a 4-stroke cylinder that burned gas to create power. Fascinated, he built a model of the engine to see how it worked. Hold on. After that, Henry spent long nights and Saturdays working on his car. Friends and co-workers helped too. When he finally rolled his creation out of his workshop, it had 2 cylinders for double the power, a 3-gallon tank for gas, and 4 bicycle tires for wheels. Henry's quadricycle could go up to 20 miles per hour, but it cost a fortune to make. Most people thought his rattling gas buggy was a joke. Get a horse, people shouted at Henry. But the whole country was crazy about Thomas's electric light. Henry scratched his head. What's his secret? Still, Henry believed in his dream. Although he knew that the other people were working on gas cars, he was determined to make the best. One that was easy to drive, big enough for families, and most important, a car everyone could afford. While Henry was working on his design, Thomas earned patents for over 100 new inventions. Henry couldn't stand it any longer. He had to find out Thomas's secret. So, Henry hopped a train in Detroit and chugged 600 miles to New York City. That's where important businessmen, including Thomas, were gathering for a meeting. Henry did some fast talking and got invited to a big dinner, with Thomas as the guest of honor. During dinner, everyone kept talking to Thomas. Henry peered down the large table at the famous inventor. He waited and waited and waited. Finally, Henry gathered his courage. He moved right next to Thomas and told him he was building a gas car. Is it a 4-cycle engine? Thomas asked. Henry lit up brighter than any light bulb. He grabbed a menu and started sketching his engine. Thomas fired off question after question, and Henry happily answered each one. And that's when it happened. Blue eyes sparkling, Thomas leaning close to Henry. He banged his fist on the table. Keep at it, he shouted. Henry smiled. Keep at it? Henry laughed. He'd known Thomas's secret all along. So, Henry kept at it. Year after year, he made a car named the Model A, but it cost too much for hard-working folks. He kept at it and made the Model B, but still too expensive. Models C, F, K, and N weren't quite right either. Henry grew tired. How many letters would it take? Then he remembered Thomas had changed his light bulb design thousands of times before he got it right. So, Henry kept at it. Finally, he made a special car, the Model T, though most people called her Tin Lizzie. Lizzie was light and fast and had 4 powerful cylinders. She didn't have fancy extras like a driver door, gas gauge, seatbelts, or shocks, but she had plenty of room for family. Millions of people bought their own Tin Lizzies. She took folks to town whenever they wanted. She carried people places they'd never been. But best of all, she brought people across the country closer together. Things had changed. The world was a little faster and a whole lot more exciting. And it was all because of 2 curious inventors, Thomas and Henry, and one secret: to keep at it. So, there's the story about Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, 2 pretty and famous inventors if you've ridden in a car and if you've used light bulbs. Let's talk a little bit about the process that Henry and Thomas used to create. So if we look up here, we can see this is kind of the design process. So first, inventors always identify the problem. They figure out what the problem is. Then they brainstorm. They figure out what are some ways that I could maybe fix this problem. Then they can start to design, okay? They can start to create. They can kind of build, which comes next. So they don't build until they've designed and they've created their thing on paper and they've come up with a plan. Once they've built, then they're going to test it and evaluate it, see if it works. If it doesn't, then they're probably going to be coming down here, okay? Or they're probably going to be coming over here and redesigning it and rebuilding it and test and evaluating it again. So they might build, test and evaluate, reevaluate, and redesign multiple times before they come to a good design that they want people to see. So if you are inventing something and it doesn't work out the first time, don't give up. Go back, redesign, build again, test it out, and try it one more time. So there is going to be some questions for you to answer based on the book and the design process. This poster right here will be posted in Google Classroom as one of your materials so that you have it. If you have any questions, let Mr. Rush and I know. Thanks.